You see, when I was 19 years old, I sat on a panel for a room full of high school students. And a woman in the room stopped me in the middle of speaking, and she said, I'm sorry to stop you, but I just want you to know that you are so articulate. And in that moment, she meant it as a compliment. A friend of mine next to me was like, boo. And I was offended. And most people can understand that. Most people say, well, you were offended because you're a young Black woman in this space, and this woman found it exceptional that you were mastering standard English. But there's another reason why I was offended. I imagined if this woman heard me speaking with my family who's Trinidadian in Caribbean Creolized English, would she have determined something else about my intellectual capacity? Or if she heard me speaking with my friends in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, in African American English, would she have determined something different about my worth? And in that moment, I understood that the answer was yes. Who am I as a student? Who am I as an educator in the space? And what does that mean in our world? And it's not just a random awareness, but an awareness of the social identities that we each navigate, including the language practices that we bring to the table. So that I get to say, well, actually, I speak African American English, I speak Caribbean Creolized English. There are multiple ways that I understand and articulate and name the world around me, right? The first A is that awareness, thinking about who you are and what your linguistic repertoire consists of. The second A speaks to agency and access. You see, once you understand who you are, once you understand the privileges that are associated with different aspects of who you are, or the way that who you are is marginalized in different ways, once you get a full understanding of what that means in our communities, a lot of young people, I work with a lot of young people who engage in African American English practices, but have no idea that it has value. Because they've been taught that it's wrong, that it's bad, that it's delinquent, that it's deficient. Once you go through that awareness process and you become aware that my language has power, right? Once you become aware of that, then you say, well, what kind of agency and access exists for me in the world? Because of the way that I speak, because of the tools that I bring to the table with my linguistic repertoire, there are spaces that I can access in the world. There's agency that I can have. That was the argument for Barack Obama's ability to access and bond with different communities because he could speak in different ways. The third A speaks to actualization. This principle, this paradigm principle says, if we do not create continuous opportunities to actualize different ways of knowing and being and expressing in institutional spaces, then we're not doing this work. And that goes directly to the term liberation, right? So the term liberation, when I say liberation literacies, the term liberation in this framework is actually rooted in liberation theology. Liberation theology argues for the interpretation of scripture from the perspective of the oppressed. Understanding that the central figure of scripture was actually someone who was poor and marginalized. And it reimagines the way that we can interpret the world if we understand the power that happens in the margins. And so that liberation piece speaks to the disruption that happens in actualization. Having a TED Talk at the center of your English curriculum is disruptive. This disrupts the traditional notions of what it means to read and write in our world, right? What it means to inscribe yourself into the narrative of history beyond the 5-paragraph essay is that I'm going to go up and I'm going to speak from the power of my voice. That's actualization, that's disruptive, and that's powerful. The fourth A speaks to achievement. Because a lot of times when I do this work, there are folks who are like, well, you just want the kids to be lazy. Actually, it takes a lot more work to be fully invested in who you are, what you have to say, than to perform school for somebody who is imposing a structure on you. Achievement means that we have rigorous, powerful standards not just for our students, but for our classrooms and our institutions. How are our institutions and our classrooms achieving the aims of true diversity and equity? When we think about achievement, we often think about assessing the students, and we never think about assessing the institutions that are meant to serve the students. So achievement is not unidirectional. It says we want to understand how engaging in this process transforms the student, but how engaging in this process transforms the space and transforms the discipline. I work with young people in New York City, and we teach them the qualitative research process. They do research, powerful research on their schools and community, but they learn it alongside hip-hop literacies. So when they're sharing with you their research data and analysis process, sometimes they spit in bars. It changes the way that we imagine engaging in the exchanging of content. It actually transforms it. When we engage in hip-hop cultural practices around freestyle, extemporaneous practices, different cognitive abilities come to the fore. There's value in those practices that challenge the discipline. So achievement speaks to that. Achievement speaks to challenging the standards that we hold for ourselves and our institutions and our world. And then the last A speaks to alteration and action. It means that this is a principle that says that we are invested in understanding that our institutions must be adaptable, must be accommodating, and truly inclusive of diverse ways of knowing. So once we understand the way that a different form of literacy, that the linguistic repertoire, the history, the cultures, the memories of the young people that we work with, once we understand the way that that challenges this institution, we think about how we reimagine the institutional space. My curriculum can't stay the same. My pedagogical approaches cannot stay the same. This institution might need to reimagine itself.